Hi, I hope I'm audible and visible to all of you. Could you give me a quick yes if you can see and hear me? And then we'll probably get started. Oh, it's okay. It's nice that you can see and hear me. Just we'll start off in a few seconds. Yeah. Hi. So the objective of today's live session is to talk about tokenization of real estate on the blockchain. So in this particular series that we are doing, in the past we've taken various kinds of assets. And today we're going to talk about probably what most people feel is one of the best assets for tokenization. Now, when we talk about real estate, it's obviously a multi trillion dollar asset class. And primarily, we divide it into three parts. So, we talk about residential real estate, commercial real estate, and agricultural farms and properties. Now, when we talk about commercial or residential, we can have all sorts of real estate from luxury to resorts to, say, even a five-star hotel, for example. So, when we look at real estate in many countries, there are a lot of laws around it. So, for example, in a country, there may be a law that, okay, foreign citizens are not allowed to buy certain kinds of real estate. Or even citizens of that country may not be permitted to buy real estate in all the states or provinces of that country. Then, in many countries, every state would have its own law relating to real estate. So, there wouldn't be one single real estate law for the whole country, but there may be separate ones for each and every state. So, because of all these complications, we find that tokenizing real estate comes with a lot of compliance and legal issues which need to be sorted before we can actually move on to the tokenization. Now, another thing that we've got to bear in mind is there are two primary ways to tokenize real estate. One would be you form a company and that company owns a particular real estate asset. So maybe 100% of a particular building may be owned by one company, which automatically means whoever owns shares of that company owns a part of that particular building or piece of real estate. The second way is you could form a trust, sometimes also called a REIT or a real estate investment trust, or an alternative investment fund registered with the securities regulator in your country. And that particular AIF or fund would own property, and whoever owns shares in the AIF automatically owns shares in the property. So these are two primary ways in which you do it. And then you would take the shares of the company or portions of that AIF and tokenize those on the blockchain. So we never really directly tokenize ownership of the property. It's either the shares or the portions of the trust which would be tokenized. Ritik mentions that like everybody cannot buy land in Himachal. That's correct. So if you look at the Indian laws, there are certain states in which if you're not domicile of that state, for example, Himachal Pradesh, you may not be able to buy it. So now if you are going to tokenize property which is located in Himachal, you have to then build in those safeguards so that somebody who is not domiciled there cannot end up buying the token because then that would become an illegal act. If you have any questions, any points to make, keep putting them there in the comments and I'll answer them. So, these are some of the important things that we need to keep in mind. Like I said, the regulatory aspect is number one. Now, once the regulatory aspect is taken care of, we need to then go into the commercial model or the business model. So, let's say it's just a piece of land. Now, in that, there may not be any kind of revenue generation happening, it's just a plot of land. So in that case, as a token holder, you are hoping for appreciation of capital, which means as the value of that land goes up, the value of the tokens you hold automatically goes up. So that's one way of looking at it. Now, what if it is a residential property which is being rented out? Then you may expect a portion of the rental. Same would go for commercial property. You may expect a portion of the rental. If it's a resort, if it's a holiday home, if it's an agricultural land which is actually producing say fruits or vegetables or anything like that, you may expect revenue streams. So we need to draw up this document for each and every piece of real estate that we are tokenizing. And in that, we need to mention that these are the revenue streams, these are the costs which are there. So, for example, the cost of employees who are going to be managing that real estate. So, that also needs to mention that these are the costs. And then, who are the people who are going to be managing it? And then, whatever profit is left, that is what is going to be distributed. So, you need to figure out how often would that distribution happen. So, all of that also needs to be mentioned. Shantanu has an interesting point here that if a REIT exists, what is the benefit of tokenizing it? So, what we've got to understand whenever we use the word tokenization, we are talking about taking an asset and putting it on the blockchain. Now, what are the benefits of putting something on the blockchain? So, the first thing would be that you are not dependent upon a third party or intermediaries for seeing all the data in real time. So, let's say that we tokenize something and put it on the blockchain. Anybody who has a node is able to access all the records, all the transactions in real time. Secondly, you have decentralized trading. So 24 by 7, 365 days a year, there's no concept of a holiday. You can quickly exchange or trade your tokens. So there are several benefits that come in. And that's why whether it's a REIT or not, that doesn't make any difference. Any asset being put on the blockchain automatically gets these benefits of the blockchain technology itself. Otherwise, how would you trade that REIT? So let's say that there are about 20 different entities running REITs. Now they would have 20 different websites. And then you would need to go to each and every website. Then you would be dependent upon a third party for the holding of your assets. But if we put all of that on a single blockchain, you can use that same blockchain wallet to access hundreds of REITs or AIFs or companies or whatever the case may be. I hope that answers your question, Shantanu. If you guys have any more questions, please put them up here. Now, on and off, I keep getting inquiries from a lot of people or startups or projects that are looking at tokenizing real estate. Now, from the Indian perspective, let me add something. Very recently, the SEBI, which is the securities regulator in India, it stands for the Securities and Exchange Board of India, has come out with a draft document talking about what are the kind of rules and regulations that we can expect very soon for anybody doing this tokenization. So they've even put in what would be the minimum amount of capital or net worth that you need to have if you are running such kind of a platform, or even if you are providing technologies for such kind of a platform. The document as of right now doesn't talk about blockchain per se. It just says, generally speaking, if you provide the tech or if you are providing the platform, what are the kind of financial norms that you need to be compliant with. So while that law has not yet come into being, have a look at it on SEBI's site and it'll give you an idea about the way they are thinking about it. And I'm sure different countries are also coming out with similar laws to make sure that the element of fraud is minimized. Let me take another question from Yogesh. His question is, as a token holder, can one use the physical asset, that is the apartment, land, etc.? It's a very good question again. So you may be aware of certain things, like for example, in India we have this holiday home offered by the Mahindra Club Resort. So what they do in that is you pay a fee for a prolonged period of time with, or maybe an annual fee, and in return you get X number of days in which you can stay in their properties around the world. Now, similarly, if you're tokenizing real estate, you can give this as one of the perks or one of the benefits, that as a token holder, for each token that you hold, you may get X days or hours of usage of that particular real estate also. So just like we could have rental streams accruing to the token holders, capital appreciation, we could also give the usage. So this becomes more common if you talk about fractional jets. So some people buy fractions of a jet plane or private plane. So it gives you a certain number of days in which you are allowed to use that plane without payment of additional rent on it. So that again would be something you can do. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let me take the next one. Which token standard is most suitable for tokenizing real estate? That's a good question. So I would say virtually any kind of a token standard could be used. So even if we use an ERC20, it doesn't make any difference, because ultimately it is not like we are converting the real estate into one single token. It is going to be multiple tokens, because It's not one person owning that entire thing. If it is one person owning the entire real estate, in that case, an ERC 721 or an NFT would do. But if we are going to fractionalize it and multiple people are going to be there, I would say something like an ERC 20 or any kind of a fungible token make more sense. Let me take Ritik's question. With tokenization, will the people from other states be able to build a partial ownership, even if not full, in states which are allowed? Okay, so that's a good question. So we've got to first look at the law, right? Now, if the law states that someone who is not a citizen of that country or someone who's not a domicile of that particular state is prohibited from owning any of that property. In that case, as the person running the platform or as the person tokenizing the land, it is your responsibility to make sure that such a person doesn't end up buying a token. Because if they do, you're committing a crime. And then, depending upon the law, there may be criminal or civil liabilities that may accrue to you. So no, you would not be able to use this to bypass the law because that particular sale would then be illegal per se. So Ritik continues that in short, will I ever be able to buy a land in Himachal if our laws are not changed? No, Ritik, you will not be able to do that. So for example, you may be aware that earlier in India, even for the states of Jammu and Kashmir, there was this particular restriction. But then after Article 370 of the Constitution was changed, now you can. So this would go purely as per the law, and tokenization would not enable you to bypass that. Right. Uh, Let me take another question. Yeah, okay. Can you explain the entire process involved in real estate tokenization? Sure. So, step one, before you even tokenize, you need to figure out what kind of legal encumbrances are around that real estate. So, let's take an example. So, let us say it comes under hill. Now, in the hilly area, right, mountainous kind of a terrain, the amount of FSI or free space index that you're given to be able to build on it is restricted. So, for example, in a hilly area, you may not be allowed to build more than X%, whereas in flatlands, you may be allowed to maintain or build more. So, which is this piece of land and what is the kind of legal situation is it in right now? Is it zoned for agriculture, for commerce, for residence, for factory use? So, for example, certain plots of land may be restricted only for garden use. You know, in many cities, that's the case. So, you can do nothing other than set up a garden in that. So, obviously, the economic prospects of that would be limited. So, that is always step one. What kind of uses is that particular zoned for or permitted for? Second, we look at are there any kinds of loans pending on it? So, is it a non performing asset? So, for example, somebody took a loan against that plot of land and then defaulted on payment, and banks have declared that as an NPA or non performing asset, and some kind of legal action has already started or a court case is going on. That's another thing we need to keep in mind. So, like I said, step one, what kind of zoning? Step two, whether there are any kinds of loans or other things pending. Step three, we also look at legal ownership, like suppose it was owned by X person who has now passed away. Children have come into the picture. Have all the children agreed to the tokenization process? Or anybody else who may enjoy a right in that land, we need to take their permission before we do the tokenization. So, for this, ideally, we would have a good law firm which would do all the due diligence. Once all that is done, then we come to point number two, where we figure out the business model. Is it only capital appreciation? Is it going to be also revenue streams? If so, what are the revenue streams? What are the kind of expenses that are going to come? What finally can be expected by the token holder? All of that needs to be calculated, and then we prepare a document to that effect. Then finally, we do the token economics. We decide how many tokens, what platforms, what are the terms and conditions. All of that is put into the prospectus, which we can then start the marketing of, and then you start taking the money, and the whole process begins. So, this is kind of the overview of the picture that you would follow. So, I hope, Nagarajan, that answered your question. Let me take another question. How the asset can be tokenized is valued. For example, Ready Reckoner is used by the government to value real estate. Sure. So now in some jurisdictions, the government comes out with official valuations that this is the worth of a particular plot of land. But in many cases, the actual market value may be above or in some cases even below the valuation. So I always recommend you go to a licensed valuer who would calculate this, because while the government ready reckoner may take into account the base price, it may not take into account the revenue streams which are coming. Right? So the government may say that this particular land is worth X, but now you are bringing in the revenue stream. So automatically the price or the valuation can go up. So that is why you should go to a licensed valuer who will be able to take all of this into account and then give you the correct valuation. In some very interesting projects that I've heard about, they're also talking not about tokenizing the real estate, but tokenizing what's on top of it. So, for example, let's say you're growing plants on it or trees on it, say mango trees. Now, you could say, I'm not tokenizing the land, I'm tokenizing only the tree, the coconut tree or the mango tree, which is expected to generate revenue for several years into the future. For example, there are certain plants like coffee and tea which can generate revenue for sometimes even 50 to 60 years after they are planted. So that needs to be taken into account, and that's where the ready reckoner may not be sufficient. Hope that answers your question. Let me take another one. If you have a water saving device and install it in your home, do you think the data generated by that device can be tokenized? Okay, that's a very interesting question. I'll have to think about this. I haven't really thought about this. So, Alberto, that's an interesting question. I'll definitely think and get back to you on this. Uh, but technically speaking, sure, it makes sense. But what we've got to figure out is what is the revenue stream that is going to be generated by this device. So, technically, we're not tokenizing the device per se, but maybe the revenue generated. But it's an interesting question. Amrit has a question, what kind of assets can be tokenized? So, while we are specifically talking about real estate today, virtually any kind of an asset can be tokenized, whether that's a spaceship, an aeroplane, carbon credits, copyright licenses, virtually any kind of an asset that has real world value can be tokenized. So, I've written quite a bit about it. You can download my tokenization playbook for free, and that'll give you a lot of ideas about what you can do. Uh, Ritik says, Ross, you should get some kind of teaching about your explanations are so. Thank you so much, Ritik. You're most welcome to buy me a cup of coffee whenever we meet next. Uh, Balasubramaniam has an interesting question. Why not ERC 720 as every land is non fungible? So, the reason is that we do not necessarily want to make that entire piece of land as one token, because that means one single person is expected to buy that. But no, when we talk about tokenization, we want to democratize. So we want to enable multiple people to be able to contribute towards it, just like people get together to crowd fund or to buy shares in a company. Similarly, because we are expecting a lot of people to buy it, non fungible may not be the best way to go. Okay, Yogesh, thank you so much. Uh, any other kind of questions that you have? I'm happy to see a lot of you got your questions and doubts clarified here. So next time I'm planning to talk about, maybe we'll talk about carbon credits, and then after that we could go into intellectual property licenses and how those can be tokenized. And if you haven't already joined, I have a WhatsApp group for tokenization of real estate. So be part of that so that you don't miss out any of these kind of sessions in future. Ritik says that he's tokenizing films, web series, and short films. Yeah, Ritik, that's a very good use case. I'm also quite bullish on that kind of a use case. In fact, I call it as a flip or a fractional license of intellectual property. And if you're interested in maybe using the hi-fi blockchain for this tokenization, Ritik, maybe you could get in touch with me, and I'll see if I can also invite you as a guest. So for the next session, depending upon the topic we're going to talk, if some of you would want to appear as guests on the show and share your perspectives, I definitely look forward to doing that. Someone says, wouldn't non fungible be perfect? Not necessary. So, like I said, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you want multiple people to be owning tokens, then non fungible is not the way to go. If you want one person or one entity, then sure, non fungible can be used. Shantanu says in the US, residential properties and shareholders earn rent as dividends. Just to clarify, does REIT also include residential property? To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a restriction on what kind of property a REIT could own, so I'm sure it would work in both cases. Another interesting question: using NFT to dematerialize real property using token, which is better? Uh, okay, I did not understand the question, so you're going to have to clarify on that question, Emmanuel. What exactly do you mean? NFT to dematerialize or using token? I mean, I'm not sure I get the question. In the meanwhile, are there any other questions you have? Okay. Yogesh says in Maharashtra, there are complex laws for ownership of land. For example, the farm plot should be minimum 11,000 square feet to be legally owned. How is that taken care of in tokenization? So, like I mentioned to you, we that's the number one thing that we need to take care of. That what are the local laws that are going to apply on this? So naturally, this is something that you would mention in the document itself. That okay, this plot happens to be in so and so state, and this is the maximum amount that you can build on it, or to be tokenizable, they have to be minimum that much. So all of this is what is going to go into the legal document, which is why, like I always say, real estate is the most complex use case of tokenization because of the legal issues. Uh, Balamurgan wants to know what about ERC 1155 multiple NFTs with same properties. So again, like I said, it would depend upon what kind of property we are talking about. So we could choose the token based on that. So I would say the choice of token isn't really such a critical thing here. What is more important is we need to get all the legal things in order, and then we need to have a good solid use case or the business model in order. After that, it's fairly easy to figure out which kind of a token system makes more sense. In fact, see, another thing I'd like to tell you here, when we're talking about the ERC, we're talking about Ethereum or EVM compatible, but there are so many other blockchains also that could be used. And again, I'd like to say it's not mandatory to use blockchain. There are people you could do fractionalization even without a blockchain. So the standard of the token isn't really so much of a game changer. Emmanuel, again, the same fungible or non fungible. Like I said, it depends upon whether one person or multiple people are going to hold it. If multiple people go with fungible, makes more sense. Manohar's question is the tokenizer has a lot of responsibilities while tokenizing, and the buyers can only buy it when they trust the tokenizer. How much does trust play a role in the entire process? Very good question. Now let's take an analogy with the stock markets, right? So when somebody comes out with an IPO, so we do have a regulator like the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US or the SEBI in India, and they put strict laws in place. And one of the most important things is that the people who the promoters of the company being listed need to come out with a very detailed prospectus, and it's very clear what information they need to fill up, and if they make deliberate errors in it, they could actually land up in prison. Now for tokenization we do not have that yet, but I would say trust is a very important factor, because in land there are, or in real estate there are so many things that could go wrong. I mean, there could be one relative of one of the owners from decades ago who people just kind of forgot about and didn't take the permission on, and he could come and completely jeopardize the whole process. So it's not just trust in the tokenizer, but trust that they've done their homework and due diligence properly. Sometimes they may be very trusted and they may not deliberately make a mistake, but then something could go wrong. So yeah, that's a very critical factor, which is why personally I stay away from tokenization of real estate, because I find it's a little too complex and a lot of things could go wrong. Let me take another question. When you tokenize a property, you, uh, okay, I did not understand this question. I'll still try to read it out. When you tokenize a property, you need not create an SVP. Uh, what do you mean by that exactly? Are you talking about an SPV, a special purpose vehicle? Then the buyers are official property owners or just token holders? I'm guessing when you say SVP, you mean the SPV, which is a special purpose vehicle. So, what happens in law is sometimes for certain acquisitions or certain business activities, we set up a dedicated legal structure. So, the simplest would be to set up a company and then distribute the shares to the token holders. That makes it the easiest to exercise your right in the court of law. So what you're basically doing is converting the ownership of the land or giving that ownership to a company, and then the shares of the company are being given to token holders. So I'll give you another easy way to do this. So let's take an example of, say, the Wyoming state in the US, which allows you that if it's a Wyoming entity, you can put the shares on the blockchain and anybody in the world can then see it and trade in it. So one very good way of doing it is if the parent company of whichever company owns the land is incorporated in Wyoming, the shares could directly be put on the blockchain and the job becomes a lot easier. But then we've got to make sure that there is no restriction in the local laws of that real estate being owned by an American entity. So that's kind of how we would go. But otherwise, other than that, there are so many different kinds of special purpose vehicles you could set up, from private companies, LLCs, LLPs, to, I mean, a trust is another thing that you could do in that. A lot of ways to do it. I think from a legal perspective, it's always the best to go for an SPV. Emmanuel says it is important to have a governance platform to enable the token holders to manage the properties. Absolutely. So, in fact, there are people who talk about making a DAO. So, a DAO is also a very interesting way of going about it, right? So, when we talk about a DAO or a decentralized autonomous organization, we don't need to have a company. We could just use a DAO and then people could be part of the DAO. But we've got to remember one thing: the DAO has to be run by a smart contract. And then, in fact, that DAO could be incorporated as an LLC also. I think in the US, you already have Utah and Wyoming, which enable you to directly incorporate a DAO as an LLC. So that's another option which is available to you. DAOs are an interesting way to go, and if they are completely automated with a smart contract, I think that's another very easy way to do that. The governance also becomes a lot easier. Gaurav says, isn't tokenization of real estate property a fractional NFT concept? Yes, sure, you could say that. Definitely. Actually, we shouldn't go too much into fungible versus non fungible, because the world kind of, in a lot of use cases, it's very hybrid the way we do these use cases. So when it's something as simple as, say, a Bitcoin, we know it's fungible. There are, say, max 21 million units that could be done, clear fungible use case. Then we talk about NFTs like, say, a digital art, like a Bored Ape Yacht Club, and we say, okay, this is an image. We expect one guy to own it. But most other use cases of tokenization are kind of hybrid. But I feel in a hybrid scenario, fungible makes a lot more sense. Tarun talks about a concept they worked on and he's put in the URL. Sure, Tarun, I could have a look at that after my session. In fact, I'd like to invite you people. I've announced something called a 30-day blockchain sprint. So if you have any tokenization idea, get in touch with me. I'll give you a format to fill it up. And then if it makes sense, we'll try to take your idea from zero to an MVP, a minimum viable product that can be launched in 30 days. And don't worry, you don't need to have any tech background for that. That's where we're kind of going to step in. And don't worry, you don't need to give up any equity or pay any fees for this. So if I can make out by what you guys are saying, a lot of you have some good ideas about real estate tokenization. So maybe you could get in touch with me and I'll help you take this idea of yours to an MVP stage in 30 days. Meta Web3 Solutions is first successful real estate tokenization company. Okay, thanks for letting us know. I didn't know about that. Given the current laws, Shantanu's question, will such a company which is tokenizing real estate get a pass in India? Well, there are several organizations which are already doing this, and all of them seem to be doing pretty well. So I don't know why there would be a problem doing that. As long as your legal compliance is in order, there shouldn't be any kind of a problem. Another interesting question is how to tokenize land and build something costly such as 100 crore infrastructure. How easy or logical this can be? Sure, that's an interesting question. So how easy would depend upon how strong the business model is and how trusted you are in the investor base. But I mean, there's no real limit on the kind of money that you could raise or the kind of projects that could be built on this. So a lot of infrastructure projects could be funded through this way. When we talk about dams and bridges and highways, all of that can be done. Hi everyone, hope you're doing great. Okay, in Flow blockchain, someone is doing something interesting. Okay, Patel's question is, how easy is it to obtain non-recourse finance on real estate in the US? And would lenders trust real estate token Paribas to straight equity. Okay, that's a complex question and it relates specifically to the US law, which is not something I have much expertise in. So, unfortunately, Gopal, you're going to have to consult with a lawyer for that who specializes in that. Emmanuel, most welcome. Okay. Ritik wants to do event tokenization. Sure, Ritik, that's something we'll probably talk about in a future session. Or Ritik, why don't you apply for the 0 to 30 days blockchain sprint? Tarun says, I'm an aspiring student. I've messaged you regarding it. Okay, sure. I'll have a look at what you've sent me. Yogesh's question, what rights token holder gets? Can someone do hostile takeover by buying maximum token and having maximum stake? Interesting question, Yogesh. So well, if you've made a company which owns the property, then obviously whoever owns the company, now you'd have to look at the company law or the corporate law of that particular country, and then the hostile takeover would come into that. If you've not made a company and they're pure tokens, well, then you will have to go only based on the prospectus that you've created, and that would take care of these kinds of issues. But you could always make sure that a hostile takeover doesn't happen. Uh, how easy is it to obtain non because okay it's the same in India and okay again that's a question which I really don't know much about. I'll have to look at that to answer. So Ritik and others who want to apply for the blockchain sprint, just connect to me on LinkedIn and just give me a one sentence overview, just one single sentence of what you're trying to do. If it makes sense to me, I'll send you a 9-point questionnaire, which I would need you to fill up. Based on that, I'll work with you guys and try to get you into the MVP in the 30 days. So ideally, we'll be starting this about on the 1st of August. So you have about a couple more weeks to apply for this. So I look forward to a lot of you applying for this. Any other questions? But we've had an amazing session, tons of questions. And if there's something that you want to know that I've missed out on, just connect to me on LinkedIn and put that there. And I'll see you guys next week. And don't forget to join the 30-day sprint if you have an idea for a great tokenization use case. Okay, take care. Bye bye.